Hello, everyone, and welcome to the King's Virtual Open House. Today, we have Dr. Antonio here with us to give us an insight about the programs available through the philosophy department here at King's. We will begin our presentation and then we will shift into a Q&A session. I would encourage you to submit all of your questions that you have through the chat function, and I will relay them to Dr. Antonio. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Antonio. So Dr. Antonio, over to you.
Thank you so much, Aziz, and welcome everyone to this virtual session at King's. And I hope everyone is as well as they can be and safe, given the wide-ranging effects of this virus and so on. But today, what I want to talk to you about is about our program here in philosophy and what philosophy is, what it can offer students, and some of the benefits of studying philosophy at the university. So this is what I'd like to do. And of course, if you have questions, as Aziz was mentioning, please indicate them in the chat function, and then I'd be happy to talk about any questions or concerns or issues, philosophical questions you have. If you have any, I'd be happy to entertain questions at that time. So the philosophy program here at King's is really a very active, very dynamic program. It has students from all kinds of disciplines and students that are really interested in all kinds of questions, whether they be questions touching on social and political issues, questions in religion, questions of the self, psychology, and so on. And so this program really tries to look at various questions of the day that are relevant for students' lives and society in general. But before I begin to talk a little bit about philosophy, I'd just like to say a little bit about my own experience of philosophy and give you some background about what I do here and who I am and so on. So I began studying philosophy as an undergraduate at the University of Toronto. And I must say, after my first couple lectures in philosophy, I was hooked. So from that point on, I went forward in philosophy. My own background in philosophy is really, I work in the history of thought, especially medieval and Renaissance thought, but I also work in recent philosophy. In particular, I look at social and political questions. I'm interested in questions of sociality, that is to say, how we form communal bonds, but I'm also interested in certain critiques of power, the nature of the state, and various political relations. It's just a little bit about me and so on. A little bit about our department. Our department really has, we call it a pluralistic department. That is to say, we don't really have one dominant specific way of thinking about philosophy. We have a wide cosmopolitan approach. So we have people that work in the various periods of history, the various traditions in philosophy, as well as those that look at various questions in philosophy, both from a historical perspective as well as a contemporary perspective. So I think that what's great about our program is that you can always find something that's of interest to you. So, and we really welcome that kind of plurality and that kind of possibility of looking at questions from different perspectives and so on. I'd like to say maybe a few words about what philosophy is, because most people would never have had philosophy in high school and so on. And for those of you who have had some philosophy or read philosophy out of fun, then you're probably familiar with what philosophy is. And for those of you who've never had any philosophical, I've never had philosophy before, maybe just a few words on what it is. You know, philosophy is one of the oldest disciplines that we have. And because it's so old, it has various multiple and complex figures in it, questions, and as always in philosophy, people dispute what it is. If I were to kind of come up with a definition or try to get you to think about what philosophy could be today in our contemporary context, I think it really does two things. One, it really gets you to think about yourself and your relationship to the world and society in a different way. It tries to give you a chance to step back from your normal everyday presuppositions about reality, and it tries to get you to question the very things that you think are obvious, normal, and so on. So in a way, philosophy is a training to get you to see things in a different way, in a different light. And it opens up new pathways and new kinds of directions in thinking. And so the idea of philosophy is really to develop yourself as a kind of human being, all your potentials and your creativity and imagination. Philosophy is the one discipline that really is devoted to that kind of personal development. The second thing that philosophy does, and I think that it's all disciplines really become philosophical in their highest form. That is to say, when these disciplines, philosophy included, reach points where knowledge comes to a limit, where we don't know how to think about things, what to think about things, philosophy enters and begins to help formulate the questions to solve problems and questions that we've never really had to think about in the past. This is what makes philosophy so enduring in a way. If you look at the history of thought across traditions, what you'll see is philosophy is constantly at the forefront, trying to ask questions, come up with solutions to problems and issues that we've never really been able to answer at a given time, whether it is a political crisis, whether it's an economic crisis, whether it's a crisis of religion, whether it's an issue that we've never really thought about, such as an ethical dilemma. And so philosophy really is that kind of forward thinking. When society doesn't really have answers, philosophy begins to help formulate the questions and contribute to that kind of thinking. So this is what philosophy is. At least this is the way I think it. This is the way I experience it. I think it's a living practice. I think it's something that is deeply, on one hand, personal, and on the other hand, it's committed to thinking through things in a different way. One of the best ways to do philosophy is to pair it up with some other discipline. This is, and I say that for two reasons, is because philosophy gives you a method, a way of thinking, a way of understanding things, but also the dialogue that you'll have at university. Your time in the university will be enhanced by studying philosophy and taking on its various questions and methods. You'll find that the field with which you approach philosophy will be enhanced as a field of study. And so philosophy really touches upon every kind of discipline. It doesn't really exclude anything. And so you can bring philosophy to come to bear on all kinds of things. And we really cultivate that in this department. I think this is what you'll see, is that we're all deeply interested in all kinds of questions, especially contemporary questions that really seek to create a better life, but also give meaningful and pragmatic responses to various issues that we face today. So a little bit about if there are any philosophers in the room, I'm sure you'll have objections to that kind of idea of what philosophy is, but I'm happy to deal with those objections. Of course, this is what we do, and in that kind of conversation, we expand the ideas of what philosophy could be and what we understand in general about science and knowledge and being and so on. Let me tell you a little bit about our program, why it's unique. I think students that come to the philosophy program not only find an openness to other disciplines, which I've spoke about, but I think also what you'll find here is a very good preparation in philosophy. Students will get, so what makes our program unique compared to other programs at Western or across the country is that we really are committed to giving students a kind of solid foundation in philosophy. That is to say, we try to expose students throughout their undergraduate years in philosophy, not only to the various historical modes of philosophy, but also philosophy as it works through across different cultures and so on. So we try to give students a real comprehensive global approach to the philosophical tradition. It's really an old ancient tradition, and so that kind of approach gives students the resources to draw upon from different periods, different figures, different cultures, different traditions. So it prepares them for kind of more global, broad sort of thinking. And so we're committed to that kind of pluralistic, cross-cultural, cross-historical approach. That being said, our program also deals with contemporary issues. And so students will find often that discussion in philosophy class will always come back to prescient, important questions of the day, ways of behaving, ways of thinking, and asking you to think about, challenge maybe some of those standard received ways of being. So we have this double focus, you know, a rich background so that you have the tools necessary in order to think more comprehensively and to have resources that can challenge and expand your own ideas, but at the same time engaged with the world, engaged with the self, engaged with issues, engaged with others in a lively conversation, all aiming towards some kind of understanding, deeper understanding. So in terms of what we offer, like let's just be a little bit more practical here in terms of what we offer. We have, if you were to do, so we have basically three kind of streams in philosophy. One is the general philosophy program in which you can get a general, you can have a major or specialization. We also have a social and political thought section in philosophy that has its unique emphasis with, and it's our most, it's a very interdisciplinary program that would have appeal to those studying political science, sociology, psychology, and so on, so the social sciences. And then we have another stream that is being reworked and rethought, which is a stream that tries to bring philosophy into conversation with world religions. So those that are interested in different religious traditions, you certainly could do courses in philosophy and pair it up with courses in religious studies that will, especially various religious traditions, from Confucianism to Japanese thought, to Indian philosophy, to African thought, to indigenous thought. So these are the kind of different fields that we have. So if you were interested, let's say, so all three programs really require you to have some kind of basic understanding of philosophy. So you would have, you would start with an introduction, any kind of introduction to philosophy. And then we have many different kinds, ones that focus on questions of the day, classical history of philosophy, if you're interested in various figures in philosophy. We also have that. We have a course on the great questions in philosophy, and so you would get a flavor of what philosophy is. We assume no background in those courses, of course. So we just introduce you to philosophy in general. All students really then would be required to do some kind of a few courses in the history of thought, so that you have some background. You would do some courses in non-Western philosophy and global philosophy, so that you can expand the horizon and become aware of philosophical traditions outside of the Western tradition, so that increases your awareness of thought across the world. And so those, and then you would do your more classical requirements in some theory of knowledge, science, and some logic, and some ethics. These are all really traditional areas in philosophy. And then once you do those basic requirements, you're free to choose what you really want to do. And we have a large variety of courses. So if you're interested more in politics, social and political thought, or if you're interested in questions of metaphysics, if you're interested in economics or other kinds of questions, we certainly would have those, or ethical questions, bioethical questions. You certainly have the option to choose the various courses that you would want to build. So you have a lot of variety there. If you want to do something like social and political thought, there you would be able to, this is a really interesting program because the emphasis, of course, is really to think through the various social and political structures that are active today and get you to think about things that we don't see that are really conditioning and operating us at a social and political level. And so there we would have a basic, so once you do your general introduction, you would take your introduction to social and political thought. If you're interested in questions of human rights, or if you're interested in questions of politics, international relations, whatever it may be, you can certainly do that as well as you come into the upper years. So you would take, in SPT, you would take a traditional history, a philosophy requirement, just to give you some tools. You would do the introduction to social and political thought. And as you move up in your last few years, you would take courses from other departments that would complement the philosophy. So you would bring the philosophy to bear on fields and questions in, let's say, political science, in sociology, in psychology, in social justice and peace studies. So you would try to think the social and political, not only from the philosophical perspective, but how it comes to bear in various disciplines that look at all kinds of issues, right, related to those disciplines. So that is a really thoroughly interdisciplinary approach to philosophy from a social and political perspective. And the third kind of program that we have begins in the same way. You would take an introduction. It was not really a program yet. It's being worked and reworked. It's hopefully it will be relaunched soon. There, what you do is you would have your basic introduction to philosophy, and you would begin to start taking courses in other forms of philosophy, so other traditions. So you would take perhaps a course in Indigenous philosophy, Confucianism, Hinduism, and Indian philosophy, African philosophy, and so on. And then in your upper years, you would take perhaps courses offered by other disciplines that focus on religious questions and different religious traditions, so be it in social justice and peace or religious studies. So you would get not only the philosophical, but you'd also get the training in the other disciplines so that you would have a broader understanding of philosophy as it relates to the religious component of your interest. One of the famous things that people always ask about philosophy is, what can you do with a philosophy degree? Like, what is it? Like, we have no profession for philosophers, and yet they're everywhere. If you look at for example, Forbes magazine indicated that most of the world leaders, most of the leading figures in all fields have some kind of philosophical training. And so though they don't do philosophy professionally, they use philosophy. And this is important for you to understand, is that philosophy is not necessarily about having a particular job as a philosopher, but it's more about how you use philosophy in the profession that you're going to choose. So philosophy always gives you an edge, we like to say, because it distinguishes you. You have a different kind of thinking that you can bring to whatever you do. It opens up worlds, it opens up perspectives, it opens up possibilities, and you begin to question in a way that people are don't normally think. Disciplines, the traditional disciplines have very specific modes of thinking. In philosophy, what it tells you to do is say, okay, question that mode. Is that mode the only way? What else is missing? What else can be added? How do you construct and build something in a deeper, better way? And so this is what philosophy really gets you to think about in that way. So I would, so it's more that what philosophy does to enhance your own professional choices. But I think most importantly, philosophy is about really building yourself and building a better world. And I think that philosophers have devoted their time to this kind of question. And it's about, whatever you do in life, you're still going to do it. And so philosophy gives you a kind of framework for building a more resilient, agile person. And this is what, and this kind of thinking will help you in life, whether in good times or bad, whether at work or doing different things. And so I think philosophy is that kind of hidden capacity to really develop and constantly build a self and a society through a kind of reflective questioning, practice, debate, and so on. So I think that it's not just about the job that's out there or the task or the life that is out there, but it's about trying to integrate you into that kind of life, you as that kind of individual that can make a difference and so on, by giving you tools with which you can begin to access the whole actor, the whole person who is actually engaging in that world and trying to build something. So, philosophy really has that kind of, there's a reason why it's lasted so long and continues to thrive around the world. One of the reasons is that because it really helps create a more expansive, more committed, more engaged person that really doesn't think in traditional ways, that really gets us to think in different ways. And so, in a society, we always need to think differently and to advance and so on. And philosophy really is that kind of preparation for that different kind of way of thinking and being in the world. And so, I really think that King's has a unique program. It really is a unique program in Canada. SPT, for example, is a unique program in the whole country, and probably on the North American continent. So it really is a wonderful place to be and become, as they say. I also want to say that our student life and the community here is wonderful. The students really do form a cohesive community. They support each other in philosophy, and they really are engaged. We have lots of opportunities for them to participate in all kinds of conferences and events. Okay, now in COVID-19, that might not happen live, but will happen virtually for sure. I also want to say that our students do really, really well. They win major scholarships, national and international, and have been placed at some of the best schools in the world. And so we're really proud of our students and how they grow as they study philosophy. So we have a winning track record, and we work with our students to help them advance after they complete their studies and so on. So we have a wonderful alumni that are very devoted and continue to thrive and help make society a better and stronger and so on. So I think I'll stop there. I think I've talked long enough. So yeah, thanks for listening. And I hope that if you have any questions, you're free to answer and so on, free to ask them or post them. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about our program or Kings and so on.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Antonio, for this informative session. We really appreciate it. So if you have any questions, please feel free to send them through the chat function. However, I do have 3 questions already lined up for you, Dr. Antonio.
Okay.
So for the first question, what kind of readings should be expected in first year? Some students are worried about the ability to understand primary texts, and is there support around that?
Yeah, so we actually, this is the good thing about philosophy, is that philosophy is actually focused on helping you to read texts, difficult ones. And so what we do in philosophy is we usually start with very short texts, and they're very dense, and we spend time helping you develop the skills to break down texts, to think about what's being said, and to get you to build the critical skills you need to read, not only in philosophy, but all the different subjects that you take. So it's a great reading. It's a great way to understand structures of arguments, logics of arguments, the rhetoric of argument, and so, because that's what philosophers do. They read things really closely. And so what we do is we focus on short readings and try to spend time with you, trying to unpack and show you how to get into those texts. So like, for instance, in most first year classes, you probably would have maybe very short articles to start with, or excerpts. in order to get you used to close reading and so on.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And the other question we have is that we have a student who's interested in going to law school, and they were asking if philosophy would be a good program to prepare themselves for law school.
So, you know, classically, this is one of our strengths. Most people that go into law school have had some philosophy, especially logic. It helps them prepare for the tests that you need to get into law school, so the LSATs and so on, which primarily test things like logic and writing and analysis and so on. So philosophy really helps with that in a very unique way, because it focuses really on those skills that you need. Second, those that actually begin to practice the law, what's really fascinating is that the law becomes very philosophical as you proceed up into it. And so philosophy helps those studying in law programs understand distinctions, understand various technical concepts. It just, your mind is trained to really understand the law. So to help you understand the law. So law, philosophy and law are a natural pairing, and they've always been a natural pairing. And it usually is a way to enhance your chances of getting into law school. But once you're in law school, it's a way to distinguish yourselves and go forward with that kind of training.
Perfect, thank you. And the next question we have is, does philosophy have any experiential learning opportunities within the program?
We do. We have various experiential learning as we pair up with various departments. So in particular, for example, the Rondine program with social justice and peace. The Rondine program is a program where our students go to Italy, to Tuscany, to study in Rondine, which is a center for peace building and international so it's a place for peace building that focuses on international conflicts. And there are students every year that go to Rondine from conflict zones, and these are young leaders. They're taught to how to build peace building skills and conflict resolution skills while they're there at Rondine. Our students join in some of the conflict and peace building sessions and courses. And at the same time, in addition to learning about Italian culture and language and learning about the peace building and conflict resolution, philosophy often will offer a seminar tied into various ethical questions that are being dealt with on the ground at Rondine or around the world. And so, for example, we've had classes on the question of migration and what is our responsibility for migrants and refugees that are coming out of conflict zones, or they're environmental refugees or economic ones. So these are the kind, and so students spend about 6 weeks in Tuscany having that kind of experience. We also encourage students to, if they were doing social and political thought, to take advantage of the various experiential courses that are offered by political science or social justice and peace. And they work all over the world, from Ethiopia to various places in Africa to Europe and so on, United States. So South America, Latin America, we certainly welcome those kind of exchanges, and we recognize those as valuable for formation in philosophy, because it gives you some kind of work in concrete fields where you can apply philosophy. Right?
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Antonio. So we have our last question. We have a student who's interested in Indigenous philosophy. You've mentioned it before in the presentation. Can you elaborate? Where can students find, is it like in the introductory courses, or is it in upper year courses?
So we've introduced an Indigenous philosophy class into the program. You will see students, so often first year classes will introduce questions pertinent to indigenous philosophies. And then we have a course in second year, I think that has just been launched, that will introduce students to indigenous philosophies and particular questions in indigenous philosophy. So the question of the land, for example, the significance of the land, how to negotiate rights, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the implications of that, trying to understand various political theories that come from indigenous philosophical modes of thinking, and knowledge transmission. So those kind of things you will find in second year. And then we are developing a series of upper level courses that would touch upon indigenous philosophy as well. And we hope to launch those as well. So we have offerings there to talk about the traditions of indigenous philosophies, but also get students to ask questions that stem from the indigenous philosophical traditions, which are rich.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Antonio. At this point, we don't have any more questions, so I would like to turn it over back to you for any final thoughts or any kind of advice for future students.
I just want to thank you all for coming. I also want to say that, all of us are philosophical. And so I hope that even if you don't take philosophy, that you continue to ask philosophical questions in whatever you do when you come to King's. I think that your professors will challenge you in interesting ways and ask you to respond in interesting ways. And so I think university can be a really outstanding time for you as you begin to think about yourselves in a new way, and as you build yourselves in an interesting way as you move forward in the future. So keep philosophizing. That's my suggestion to everyone.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Antonio, for your informative session. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for being here for this session.
Thank you, everyone.
If you have any questions for myself or Dr. Antonio, feel free to email us at kings@uwo.ca. Again, thank you, Dr. Antonio, and thank you, everyone who attended. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.